The morning light stretched across the Rivera estate, like liquid gold slipping between glass panels and marble floors until it touched everything except warmth. For Aisha, Washington standing at the edge of the grand conservatory, it felt like sunlight through ice, beautiful but distant. She had spent 4 years studying architecture, dreaming of building homes that could breathe. Yet now, with her degree folded away in a drawer and her bank account nearly empty, she found herself holding a broom instead of a blueprint. The irony didn't sting as much as the silence. The Rivera estate was a masterpiece, 3 stories of steel and light, designed to make you feel small. The glass walls reflected the morning sky so perfectly that Aisha felt she was walking through clouds invisible within them. Everything gleamed: the marble floors, the manicured orchids, even the air seemed polished. But perfection, she thought, was just another kind of prison, one that hid its loneliness behind design. Her reflection trembled faintly in the glass, blurred by the condensation of her breath. She whispered to it, half in jest, half in prayer. "Good morning, Aisha Washington. Welcome to the palace of people who will never see you." But someone did. The sound of footsteps echoed, not hurried, not hesitant, but deliberate, like someone accustomed to owning silence. Ethan Rivera appeared in the doorway. He didn't walk into a room so much as claim it. Tall, composed, his suit the color of storm clouds, the kind that arrive without thunder, only quiet inevitability. The morning light fractured around him, reflecting off the glass and landing on his face in shifting patterns. He looked like a man sculpted out of precision and distance. Aisha froze. She recognized him instantly, not from magazines or screens, though she had seen plenty. It was something else, something about the way he stood, like the world had disappointed him one too many times, and he had learned to live above it. His gaze swept across the room, not searching, but measuring. Then it landed on her. "Who are you?" The question wasn't unkind, but it wasn't gentle either. It was the voice of a man used to answers, not explanations. "Aisha," she managed, straightening her back as if posture could erase insignificance. "Aisha Washington, the new housekeeper." His brows arched slightly. "Washington." He repeated it as if tasting the name. Then after a pause, "Aisha, what does it mean?" She hesitated. No one had asked her that in years. "It means justice in Swahili," she said, voice steady. "But I'm not sure I still believe in it." Something flickered in his eyes, surprise perhaps, or recognition. Then a small, reluctant smile ghosted across his face. "Honest," he said. "That's rare here." He looked at her for a moment longer, as if he were reading an architectural plan only he could understand. Then he turned, his reflection gliding beside him on the mirrored floor. As he left, Aisha realized her heart was beating too fast for a conversation that brief. She told herself it was nerves. She was lying. The rest of the morning passed in rhythms of work. The quiet hiss of a broom on tile, the soft hum of distant air conditioning, the muted world of someone paid to erase traces of life. But Ethan Rivera lingered in her mind, like light trapped in glass, sharp, refracted, impossible to ignore. She learned pieces of him from the whispers of others, that he'd inherited the estate young after his mother's death, that he had built a renewable energy empire before 30, that he was brilliant, ruthless, and possibly incapable of love. None of that surprised her. What surprised her was the detail no one mentioned: the loneliness that filled his home. In the afternoons when sunlight poured through the conservatory ceiling, she would see the dust dance in the air, fragile and alive, and imagine that perhaps even the dust was freer than its owner. It was near dusk when she entered the forbidden wing, the east corridor. Mrs. Harrison, the head housekeeper, had made it clear that no one went there. But the marble had been streaked with footprints after the rain, and her instinct for order won over obedience. The hall was lined with photographs, none digital, all framed in gold and glass. They captured moments too precise to be spontaneous. A woman with dark hair arranging orchids. A boy with solemn eyes holding her hand. Aisha's chest tightened. The boy was Ethan. The woman must have been his mother. She stepped closer. The photograph's glass reflected her face over theirs, and for a brief second, 3 lives seemed to merge in the same frame, past, present, and the aching in between. Behind her, a voice broke the silence. "You shouldn't be here." She turned sharply. Ethan stood in the shadows, his expression unreadable. The hallway light cut across his face, highlighting the sharpness of his jaw, the stillness of his eyes. "I saw the footprints," she said quickly. "I didn't want them to stain the marble." He regarded her for a long moment. Then his gaze drifted to the photograph between them. "You like architecture, don't you? How do you—" He nodded toward her bag. "You keep sketching when you think no one's watching." Her throat went dry. "It's a habit. I like to study spaces." "Then tell me," he said, stepping closer, his voice soft but firm. "What do you see when you look at this house?" Aisha hesitated, then answered honestly. "I see beauty built to hide grief." He blinked. For a heartbeat, the wall between them, class, wealth, color, pain, cracked open. She saw something vulnerable in his eyes before he looked away. "My mother designed the conservatory," he said quietly. "It was her last project before she died. She called it her sanctuary. And you kept it exactly as she left it," Aisha said gently. Even the silence. His lips parted slightly, as if her words had struck a chord he didn't know existed. He took a step closer. "You shouldn't say things like that." "Why?" "Because they're true." The air shifted warmer now, heavy with something unnamed. Ethan's hand brushed one of the glass panels, leaving a faint print behind. "Perfection is easy," he said. "Maintenance is the hard part." Aisha met his gaze. "That's true for people too." The faintest smile curved his lips. "You have no idea how right you are." A sudden clap of thunder outside shattered the moment. Rain began to fall soft at first, then insistent drumming against the glass like 1,000 tiny heartbeats. Ethan looked up. "Storm season," he murmured. "Seems fitting," Aisha said. "Even the sky needs to let go sometimes." He turned back to her. "You speak as if you've known loss." She hesitated. "Everyone who's ever built something beautiful has lost something first." That made him pause long enough for her to realize she'd said too much. But instead of retreating, he studied her with quiet fascination, like a man tracing the blueprint of something he didn't understand yet. When the rain finally slowed, the conservatory shimmered. Droplets clung to every surface, bending light into tiny rainbows. Ethan stood beside her, looking out through the glass at a world blurred and reborn. "I've spent my whole life designing systems that control light," he said softly. "But maybe I never learned how to stand in it." Aisha didn't know why, but her chest tightened with something like empathy. "Then maybe it's time to stop designing and start feeling." He looked at her, really looked, and for the first time she saw it. Not arrogance, not indifference, but exhaustion. The kind that comes from carrying too much for too long. "You sound like her," he whispered. "Your mother." He nodded once, barely. "She believed people could be rebuilt." "Maybe she was right," Aisha said. "Maybe that's what you're doing, rebuilding." Ethan's eyes met hers, dark and searching. "Or maybe I'm just pretending the cracks don't exist." For a long time, neither of them spoke. The air between them was heavy, fragile, like glass before it shatters. When Aisha finally left the conservatory that night, she paused at the threshold. Through the reflection on the glass, she could still see him standing alone in the stormlight, framed by orchids and memories. She didn't know if he was watching her go. She only knew that somehow she didn't feel invisible anymore. Outside, her old Toyota waited beneath the dripping oaks. The rain had washed the dust from its hood, making it almost gleam. She slid behind the wheel, started the engine, and looked once more toward the mansion. Through the distant glass, she saw a flicker, a shadow moving past light. A man, maybe. Or just her imagination. The wipers swept across the windshield, and the world blurred. But one thought stayed sharp in her mind, like a line she had unknowingly crossed. She hadn't just entered someone's home. She had stepped into his solitude, and neither of them, though they didn't know it yet, would ever be the same again. Mornings in the Rivera estate always began with light, too much of it, Aisha thought. It poured through the endless walls of glass, flooding every corner, until even the shadows seemed to surrender. But light, she was learning, could be just as cruel as darkness. It revealed everything: the fingerprints on crystal, the fatigue under the eyes, the loneliness that no marble could disguise. Each dawn she moved through the conservatory, with her bucket, her cloth, and a discipline inherited from her mother. Do it right or don't do it at all. The glass panels stretched from floor to ceiling, curving upward like the ribs of a cathedral. Every time she cleaned one, her reflection moved with her hundreds of Aishas, caught in light, each one wiping away something invisible. Ethan was always there before she arrived. He didn't greet her, not at first. He would sit at the far end of the conservatory, behind a sleek black desk that looked more like sculpture than furniture. Screens glowed faintly in front of him, lines of data designs, projections. His empire condensed into pixels and numbers. For weeks, they existed like that, parallel, silent, orbiting the same space without touching. But light has a way of breaking through what people build to contain themselves. One morning she caught him watching her. He didn't look away. Neither did she. "What do you see when you look at that glass?" he asked finally, voice calm, detached, the tone of a man who tests theories for sport. She hesitated. "Imperfection," she said. "The way sunlight hits it reveals the flaws." He leaned back, considering. Most people only see their own reflection. Maybe they're afraid to see what's behind it. That earned a quiet laugh, short-surprised. The sound changed the air. From that day, the silence between them softened. Their exchanges grew longer, less accidental. Sometimes he'd ask about her sketches. Sometimes she'd ask about the plants in the conservatory, each orchid a memory of his mother. "She used to talk to them," Ethan said once, his gaze on a pale white bloom. "Said orchids understood silence better than people." "Maybe that's why they survive here," Aisha murmured. "This house doesn't seem to like noise." He looked at her, and for a heartbeat, his mask slipped. "You're right," he said quietly. "It doesn't." The next morning, the light was different, gentler, as if the sky itself had decided to listen. Aisha was dusting the high glass beams when Ethan appeared unexpectedly beside her. "You missed a spot," he said, pointing upward. She followed his gesture, squinting. "That one?" "Yes." "And that one?" He smiled faintly. "I'm obsessive, I'm told. I'd call it thorough." He tilted his head. "That's generous." The banter was small, almost nothing, but for both it felt like the first breath after holding it too long. He studied her face, the curve of focus between her brows. "Why are you really here, Aisha? You don't belong in uniform." She kept her gaze on the glass. "Belonging is a luxury I can't afford." He waited. Finally she added, "I studied architecture. But I stopped designing buildings when I realized no one would hire someone like me to build them." His expression shifted almost imperceptibly. "Someone like you." She looked at him then, not defiantly, but truthfully. A woman. A black woman. From nowhere, that matters. For once, he didn't have an answer. The silence stretched between them, raw but honest, like a bridge half-built. Later that week, he found her sketchbook left open on a table. Lines in graphite bold, yet tender blueprints of spaces filled with air and light, homes that breathed instead of confined. In the margin, a note. Every building should make people feel seen. He closed the book, something unsteady stirring in him. That evening, he called her to the conservatory. "You designed this," he said, holding up the page. Aisha's heart dropped. "You went through my things." He ignored the question. "It's brilliant. Raw, but brilliant. It's just an idea. Then let's make it real." Her breath caught. "Excuse me. I want you to reimagine this conservatory," he said. "Not as my mother left it. As you would." She stared at him. "You're serious. Completely." "Why me?" Ethan's eyes softened, though his tone didn't. "Because you see things the rest of us refuse to." She hesitated. Fear, pride, disbelief all tangled in her chest. Then quietly, "If I do this, it won't look the same." "Good," he said. "Maybe that's the point." The days that followed blurred into sketches and sunlight. She began redesigning the space, replacing symmetry with movement, letting light fall where it wished instead of where it was told. Ethan watched her work from a distance, pretending to be busy, drawn instead by the rhythm of her focus. He noticed things he shouldn't, how she hummed softly when she drew, how her fingers brushed her lips when she thought, how she always looked up before finishing a line, as if checking with the sky for approval. She noticed things too, how his confidence masked fatigue, how his voice, when softened, sounded almost tender, how he carried grief not like a wound, but like an inheritance. It was never spoken, but each began to orbit the other differently, pulled by something wordless, inevitable. Then came the night of the power outage. A summer storm rolled in without warning. The sky cracked open, spilling thunder and rain across the estate. When the lights went out, the conservatory turned to a dark ocean of glass and sound. Aisha, caught mid-cleaning, froze as lightning illuminated the orchids in sharp, ghostly bursts. From the darkness, Ethan's voice called out, "Are you all right?" "I think so," she said, trying to steady her breathing. He appeared with a flashlight, its beam slicing through the dark until it landed on her face. "You shouldn't be here during storms," he said, his tone more worried than reproachful. "Storms don't scare me. They should." A clap of thunder shook the walls, and instinctively she stepped closer. Their shadows met on the glass, two outlines trembling as one. For a moment, the world was reduced to breath and heartbeat. Ethan's voice was low. "Do you know why I built this house?" She shook her head. "So I'd never have to step outside again." Aisha looked around at the vast glass shell surrounding them, beautiful, impenetrable. "You built a sanctuary," she whispered. "But it's a cage." He met her gaze. "Maybe I deserved one. No one deserves to live without light." The flashlight flickered, then went out, leaving them in the honest dark. Outside, lightning flashed, and for a heartbeat, they saw each other, fully unguarded, human. Something shifted then. Not love, not yet, but a recognition deeper than touch. When the lights returned, they both stepped back at once, as if the spell had broken. Ethan cleared his throat. "You should rest. We'll continue tomorrow." Aisha nodded, clutching her cloth like a lifeline. "Good night, Mr. Rivera." He hesitated. "Good night, Aisha." She left quickly, her footsteps soft against marble, her pulse anything but. Later, Ethan sat alone in the revived glow of electricity. On the table lay her sketch, edges damp from the rain that had leaked through a cracked window. He traced the lines with his thumb, the shapes of light she had drawn, the spaces that breathed. In her design, he saw something he hadn't felt in years: warmth. And he realized with a quiet dread that it didn't come from the sun. Aisha, lying awake in the small staff quarters, watched lightning still pulsing through the clouds. Every flash illuminated her ceiling, fractured, imperfect, alive. She thought of his eyes in the dark, the way his voice had trembled, not from fear, but from something deeper, something that mirrored her own loneliness. She turned on her side, whispering to the dark, "Not again. Don't fall for walls made of glass." But the light, fickle, tender, relentless, had already touched her. Rumors move faster than truth, and in houses made of glass, whispers are louder than thunder. It began with a photograph. A grainy image from a gardener's phone. Aisha standing in the conservatory beside Ethan during the storm, her hand brushing his sleeve as lightning fractured the sky behind them. It was nothing more than a frame stolen from chance, yet by morning it had become a headline. "The billionaire and the maid." The words burned across every news feed, every glossy screen in the estate's staff quarters. By noon, journalists were camping outside the gates. By evening, Aisha's name, or rather the distorted version of it, was everywhere she didn't want to be. Inside the conservatory, the orchids trembled under the sudden weight of flashing lights from beyond the fence. It was as if the whole world had turned its gaze inward, staring at them through 1,000 panes of glass. Aisha didn't cry. She cleaned the way she always did when the world became too loud. Her hands moved mechanically, scrubbing, polishing, erasing. But no amount of effort could clean what had already been stained: her reputation, her peace, her sense of belonging. When Ethan entered the room that afternoon, she didn't look up. The scent of rain still clung to his clothes. "Don't say anything," she murmured. "I have to," he replied softly. "No," she said, turning toward him. Her eyes were sharp, but her voice shook. "You don't have to fix this. You don't have to fix me." He took a step closer. "Aisha." "Don't," she said again. "Please." Silence stretched between them, like the glass that surrounded them, clear, unbroken, suffocating. Finally, she exhaled the sound trembling out of her chest. "I've been poor my whole life, Ethan. I've been invisible, judged, dismissed. I can live with that. But I can't live being pitied." He looked at her, really looked, and something inside him splintered. "You think that's what this is? Pity. What else could it be? You see a woman who doesn't belong in your world, and for once you want to play hero." Her words hit harder than any headline. He didn't flinch, but she saw the wound land. That night, she packed her things: a small duffel, her sketchbook, and a few folded shirts. The rain had started again, thin and cold. Outside, the estate's lights glowed faintly, diffused through mist. She left a note on the counter. "Thank you for everything, but this place was never mine to keep." By the time she reached the front gate, the world had turned silver with rain. She didn't hear the sound of the car approaching until it stopped beside her. Ethan stepped out, umbrella in hand, his hair damp, his expression unreadable. "You were just going to disappear?" he asked. "It's easier than saying goodbye." "Running always is," he said quietly, "but it doesn't make it right." She folded her arms, the cold biting through her jacket. "What do you want me to say? That I'll stay? That I'll wait until the next rumor destroys whatever's left of me? I want you to see that all of it doesn't matter." She laughed, bitter and small. "It matters to me." The wind picked up sweeping rain sideways. The umbrella flipped inside out, useless now. He tossed it aside. "Aisha," he said, voice raised above the storm. "This house, it's just glass and concrete without you in it. You're the only thing that makes it breathe." Her throat tightened. She wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to. But belief had always been expensive for her, and trust even more so. You can't fix me, Ethan. You can't buy my peace or rewrite my past. I'm not trying to, he said, stepping closer until the rain between them vanished. But I can't let you walk away thinking this is pity. Then what is it? He didn't hesitate. It's truth. It's the first thing in my life that feels real. Lightning flashed, painting his face in white and shadow. For a second she saw the boy behind the billionaire, the one who had built walls so tall even love couldn't climb them. She whispered, "And what if it's not love? What if it's just two broken people mistaking need for destiny? Then let's break together," he said softly. "At least it will be honest." For a long moment, neither moved. The rain fell harder, drumming against glass, pooling around their feet. She could feel her pulse beating in her wrists, her throat the air. Then she stepped back. "I can't," she said barely above a whisper. "I've spent my whole life building something for myself. If I stay, I'll lose that. And I won't lose myself, not even for you." He didn't stop her this time. He simply nodded, the kind of nod that hurts more than shouting ever could. When she turned to leave, he said quietly, "You can't keep running from the one person who actually sees you." She didn't look back. "And you can't keep trying to save people who never asked to be rescued." The gate opened with a metallic groan, and the night swallowed her. For days the house was silent. Ethan stopped working. The conservatory, once full of orchids and light, dimmed into stillness. Even Mrs. Harrison noticed. "She brought color with her," she said one morning, setting down his untouched coffee. "Now it's just glass again." He didn't answer. He only stared at the sketchbook she'd left behind, the one he couldn't bring himself to open. The note inside the cover was brief. "Build something that breathes." At night he walked through the conservatory, tracing his fingers over the panels she had cleaned, over the places she had stood. The glass, cold and perfect, reflected a man he barely recognized. On the fifth night, he finally opened her sketchbook. The first page was a drawing of the house, but not as it was. In her version, walls were softened windows, opened light scattered freely through wide spaces, and in the center, a single line of text. "Even glass can heal if it learns to bend." He exhaled, eyes stinging though from what anger, regret, or longing he couldn't tell. A week passed before he saw her again. It was at a construction site downtown, one of his company's smaller community projects. She was there, clipboard in hand, hard hat perched awkwardly on her curls, talking to a group of volunteers. The rain had stopped, and sunlight streamed through the half-built frames. He didn't approach at first. He simply watched. She was radiant in motion, purposeful, alive, in a way she'd never been within the estate's pristine walls. When she finally noticed him, her expression faltered. Surprise, then caution. "You shouldn't be here," she said, when he came closer. "I know," he replied. "But you were right. Some houses don't breathe. I'm changing that." She arched a brow. "Why tell me?" "Because you're the one who taught me to see what's behind the glass." For the first time in weeks, she smiled faintly, uncertain, but real. Then she looked away. "Don't make me your redemption story, Ethan. Build what you need to build, but don't build it for me." "I'm not," he said. "I'm building it because of you." When he left, she didn't stop him. But that night, back in her small apartment, she found an envelope slipped under the door. Inside was a single sketch, the conservatory reimagined exactly as she'd drawn it. Underneath, his handwriting, "You were right. The house breathes now." She traced the ink with her fingertip, her chest tightening in that quiet, dangerous way that felt too much like hope. Outside, a storm gathered once more over the city, but this time the rain didn't sound like grief. It sounded like cleansing. And somewhere inside the Rivera estate, Ethan stood alone in the conservatory as the first drops hit the glass, whispering into the empty room. Maybe love isn't about saving or staying. Maybe it's about seeing. Storms, Aisha had learned, don't always begin with thunder. Sometimes they start with a whisper and a woman's laugh on live television. Her name was Victoria Hale, Ethan's former business partner, and the only person in his orbit who could match his arrogance. She stood in front of flashing cameras, her crimson lips curved into something almost gentle. Almost. Of course, she said, I'm happy for Ethan, though it's unfortunate that his new companion's timing seems so perfect. Pregnant, I hear. How convenient. The words spread faster than wildfire across headlines, group chats, dinner parties. The billionaire's housekeeper, the baby, the scandal. By morning, Aisha's face was plastered across tabloids beside words like fortune trap and betrayal. The city didn't know her, but it had already decided what kind of woman she was. Ethan saw the first headline as he stepped out of his car. He froze, not because of the accusation, but because of the look in her eyes when she opened the door. She was pale, sleepless, holding a folded newspaper like a verdict. Say something, she whispered. He reached for her hand, but she pulled away. They're calling me a thief, Ethan. A liar. Her voice broke. And the worst part is they think it's true. Because I'm the one who doesn't belong. He shook his head, voice low and controlled. I'll fix it. Her laugh was sharp, bitter. You think money can fix this? You can't buy silence. You can't make the world forget what they've decided I am. Then we change the story, he said. Our way. But she saw something behind his calm, that same steel mask he wore in boardrooms, in wars of numbers and strategy. She hated that look, because it meant he was about to sacrifice another piece of himself to protect her, and she refused to be anyone's reason for self-destruction. The next morning he was gone. By noon, Rivera Industries had called an emergency board meeting. Cameras gathered outside the glass tower downtown. Inside, men in suits spoke in coded tones. Optics damage control. Stock volatility. Ethan sat at the head of the table, silent. The storm outside the windows mirrored the one inside, wind, battering against the high-rise rain streaking down like tears on glass. Sir, one executive said, if this rumor continues, investors will demand a statement, a public apology, or a separation. A separation. The word landed like a blade. Ethan stood slow and deliberate. No, Mr. Rivera. Schedule a press conference, he interrupted. For tonight. The room fell silent. What should we tell them? Someone asked. He looked out the window, his reflection fractured by lightning. The truth. Back at the estate, Aisha sat alone in the conservatory, surrounded by orchids that had begun to wither from neglect. The rain outside made the glass tremble, like the house itself was afraid. Her phone buzzed endlessly, journalists, colleagues, even strangers asking for comment. She turned it off. Her thoughts spun in loops, guilt, fear, defiance. She hadn't seen him since morning. Maybe he'd realized she wasn't worth the ruin. Maybe the story was ending exactly as it began, with distance. Then the door opened. Ethan stood there, soaked from the rain, eyes burning with resolve. You should pack, he said softly. She blinked. So it's true. You're sending me away. No, he said. You're coming with me. The drive into the city was silent, except for the sound of rain against the windshield. When they arrived, the crowd was already there. A sea of microphones and flashing bulbs outside Rivera Industries. Inside the lobby, chaos. Publicists arguing, lawyers pacing, PR teams whispering damage control. Aisha froze at the sight. Ethan. This is madness. He turned to her, his expression unflinching. They took your voice. I'm giving it back. Before she could answer, he pushed through the glass doors into the storm. Cameras screamed. Questions flew like shards of glass. And then he took her hand. It was a simple gesture, but it split the world open. "Good evening," Ethan said, his voice steady, as the rain poured around them. The lights painted his face in flashes of white and gold. "I'm here to address the rumors about my personal life." A hush fell. The city itself seemed to hold its breath. He looked down at Aisha, then back at the cameras. "What you've heard, the lies, the assumptions are noise. So let me give you the truth." He paused. "Aisha Washington is not a scandal. She's the reason I can look in the mirror again. She's the one who reminded me what honesty feels like." The reporters murmured, their pens stilling. Ethan continued, his tone softening. "You think she needs me to save her? You're wrong. I'm the one who was drowning, and she's the one who pulled me back to air." A flash of lightning illuminated them both, his words cutting through the rain like a confession. "She didn't come into my life for money or power," he said. "And she doesn't need my name to matter. But I need hers, because for the first time, I want to build something real. With her." He turned to her, and for a moment, the cameras disappeared. "Ko e hong kyu." He whispered the Vietnamese phrase, slipping from some deep place he'd once visited, once loved. Then, in English, "She's the one who saved me." The crowd erupted, questions, shouts, flashes. But Aisha heard none of it. She stood beside him, rain soaking her dress, trembling not from fear, but from the weight of what he'd done. He had given her the one thing she thought she'd never have again: dignity. Her hand found his. Their fingers intertwined, steady against the storm. And in that moment, something inside her shifted. The shame, the fear, the loneliness, they all scattered like rain, chased away by sunlight. She realized love wasn't about rescue or surrender. It was about standing beside someone when the whole world tried to erase you both. Later, when the press conference ended, they retreated inside the tower. The city glowed outside, slick streets, neon reflections, the afterglow of chaos. Aisha leaned against the glass wall, exhausted. "Do you know what you've just done?" she whispered. "Yes," he said simply. "And I'd do it again." She turned toward him. "You could lose everything." "Maybe I already did," he said. "Before you." Her chest tightened. "And what happens tomorrow? When the headlines twist this again? When they call you a fool for choosing me?" He smiled faintly. "Then let them. Every empire falls eventually. I just want mine to mean something before it does." Outside, the storm began to quiet. Through the glass, dawn's first light pressed against the horizon, hesitant, fragile, but real. Ethan reached for her hand once more. "Look," he said softly. The rain stopped. Aisha exhaled, tears and laughter blurring together. "It never really stops," she murmured. "It just learns where to fall." He looked at her, the corners of his mouth lifting. "Then maybe we'll learn to stand in it." When they stepped outside, the city smelled of rain and renewal. Reporters had left. Only the echo of their footsteps remained. In the reflection of the tower's glass facade, they saw themselves small, imperfect, but side by side. And for the first time since the storm began, Aisha wasn't running. She was home. The world quieted after the storm, not because it forgave, but because it grew tired of shouting. Headlines faded. Cameras turned elsewhere. But inside the Rivera estate, life began again quietly, like a seed pushing through winter soil. It was Aisha who felt it first, that faint flutter deep inside her, softer than a heartbeat, more fragile than breath. She didn't tell him right away. She wanted one moment that was hers alone, one secret untouched by the world's noise. Every morning she sat by the window of the glass conservatory, watching the orchids sway in the light breeze. The air smelled of rain and new beginnings. For the first time in months, she wasn't cleaning or designing or defending herself. She was simply being. And yet beneath the calm there was fear. Because joy, she had learned, often came hand in hand with the terror of losing it. Ethan found her there one morning, sketchbook open on her knees, sunlight spilling across her face. He didn't speak at first. He simply watched the quiet way her fingers traced invisible lines in the air, as if she were drawing a future she hadn't yet dared to believe in. Finally, he said, "You're different." She looked up. "Different how?" He hesitated. "Lighter. As if something inside you decided to forgive the world." She smiled faintly. "Maybe it's not the world that changed. Maybe it's just me." He sat beside her, the distance between them filled with warmth instead of tension. And that was when she took his hand and placed it over her stomach. At first, he didn't understand. Then, as his palm rested there, he felt it the smallest, most miraculous pulse, like two whispers of life answering back. His eyes widened. "Aisha." "Twins," she said softly. "I wanted to tell you in this room, because this is where everything broke and began." For a moment, the only sound was their breathing. Then Ethan's head dropped forward, resting against her shoulder, laughter and disbelief trembling in his voice. "I've spent my life controlling everything," he murmured. "Every risk, every variable. But this? I can't control this." "Good," she said, smiling through tears. "Maybe now you'll finally learn how to live." Over the next few months, time stretched differently. Slower, kinder. The conservatory became their sanctuary again, not as a monument to his mother's grief, but as a cradle for new life. Ethan replaced the cold marble floor with warm wood. Aisha filled the room with soft plants, ivy lavender herbs that smelled like memory. Every afternoon she would draw as he worked. Every evening they'd walk the garden paths in silence, listening to the wind like an old friend. But peace never lasted long. When the board of Rivera Industries called for his resignation, Ethan didn't argue. They framed it as a mutual decision, citing public distraction. In truth, he'd already made his choice. "I thought losing everything would destroy me," he told Aisha that night, sitting on the floor beside her chair. "Turns out it just made room for something real." She touched his hair, the gesture simple and tender. "Empires crumble. People don't have to." He smiled, tired but content. "You always say the right thing." "I don't," she replied. "I just finally stopped being afraid to say what's true." But truth has its price. One evening, as they returned from the doctor's appointment, the old gate guard handed her an envelope. It was postmarked New York with no name on it, only a red wax seal shaped like a rose. Inside, a single sentence, written in looping script: "Be careful what you plant. Some seeds grow into storms." Aisha folded it quietly, hiding it in her pocket. She didn't tell Ethan. She didn't need to. The past always finds its way back, especially when people start to heal. Still, that night she couldn't sleep. She lay awake listening to the rain, her hand over her stomach, whispering to the two small lives inside, "I'll protect you from everything I couldn't protect myself from." In the next room, Ethan sat by the window staring out into the dark. He'd seen the fear in her eyes. He didn't know why, but something in his chest tightened, that old instinct to control what can't be tamed. But this time, instead of fighting it, he simply closed his eyes and let it go. Spring arrived with shy sunlight. Aisha's belly grew round and radiant beneath her loose white dresses. Ethan began sketching again, not blueprints for skyscrapers or factories, but tiny cribs, tree houses, drawings of futures that felt small and infinite at once. They didn't talk much about the world outside. The news still spun stories, but the public's appetite had shifted. Somewhere between scandal and silence, people began to see something different in them. Not sin or spectacle, but something achingly human. A talk show headline read, "The woman who changed the billionaire," or just reminded him to feel. Aisha laughed when she saw it. At least they're asking better questions. Ethan grinned. We could send them an answer, which is... He took her hand and placed it over his heart. Love's not a cure. It's a mirror. By the time summer came, the conservatory glowed with light. The orchids had bloomed again, fragile white against green, their petals trembling like breath. Aisha spent her mornings writing letters to the twins. She didn't show them to Ethan, not yet. Each began the same way. If you ever doubt your worth, remember you were born of two broken hearts that decided to grow something beautiful anyway. At night, Ethan read aloud from old books. His mother once loved stories of constellations of stars born from chaos. His voice filled the glass room with warmth. And between each word, Aisha would watch him, the man who had once built empires from logic, now learning to build gentleness from faith. But peace again came with a whisper of its opposite. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon when Aisha fainted in the garden. By the time Ethan carried her inside, her pulse was steady, but her breathing shallow. The doctor arrived within the hour. Exhaustion, she said gently. She's strong, but she needs rest. The twins are healthy, but they demand more from her body than she admits. Ethan sat beside the bed all night, her hand in his. The world outside blurred into silence. At dawn, Aisha woke to find him still there, eyes red, unshaven, his fingers entwined with hers. "Don't look at me like that," she whispered. "Like what?" "Like I'm fragile." He smiled, weary, but full of awe. "You're not fragile. You're extraordinary." Her lips curved faintly. "So are they," she said, guiding his hand to her belly. And their two soft, synchronized rhythms, steady as sunrise. Ethan's voice trembled. "Two hearts," he whispered. "How do you carry that much life?" By remembering, she said, eyes glistening, that love isn't something we find. It's something we grow even in the wind. Weeks later, when she was strong enough to walk again, they returned to the conservatory. The afternoon light poured through the glass, and the orchids seemed to bow toward her as she passed. Ethan stood behind her, arms around her waist, his hands resting on the curve of new life between them. "Do you ever think about how far we've come?" he asked softly. "Every day," she said. "I used to believe love was a luxury. Now I know it's the only thing that makes life mean anything." He kissed her temple, eyes closing as the wind rustled the leaves. "And I used to believe control kept me safe. But it was just keeping me alone." She smiled. "Then maybe we're both learning to let go." Outside, the wind picked up scattering petals across the garden, white against green, fleeting but beautiful. And in that moment, they both understood. The storm hadn't destroyed them. It had planted them. And from that storm, two tiny hearts were already beginning to bloom. Morning came wrapped in gold. The world outside still carried the scent of rain, clean, new, like the first page of a book. In the glass conservatory, sunlight filtered through orchids heavy with dew. The air shimmered with warmth, and something quieter peace. This was not a wedding of spectacle. No cameras, no luxury guests, no press waiting to dissect their love. Just a circle of light, a handful of friends, and two people who had already lost and found each other more times than they could count. Aisha stood in front of the mirror, not the tall, ornate one from Ethan's mother's room, but a small, round piece of glass she'd chosen herself. Her dress was simple ivory cotton, soft as breath, loose around the growing curve of her belly. For once, she didn't feel like she was stepping into someone else's story. This one was hers. Ethan waited outside, buttoning his shirt sleeves, hands trembling more than he expected. He'd faced hostile boardrooms, billion-dollar deals, and storms that shook his empire. None of it compared to the quiet fear of standing before the woman who had seen him completely and stayed. Mrs. Harrison, ever gentle, adjusted his boutonniere, a single white orchid. "She'll come when she's ready," she said with a knowing smile. He nodded, exhaling slowly. "She's always been ready. It's me who had to catch up." The ceremony began as the first light touched the glass ceiling. The officiant was an old friend of Ethan's mother, a soft-spoken man with silver hair and eyes that carried laughter and sorrow in equal measure. Aisha walked toward him down the narrow aisle lined with orchids. There was no music, just the sound of her steps, slow, deliberate, like the heartbeat of the room itself. When their eyes met, the world stilled. It wasn't awe or surprise anymore. It was recognition. Ethan reached for her hand. It fit perfectly, as if the years of distance had been leading to this single touch. "You look," he began. "Don't say perfect," she interrupted, smiling softly. "We promised each other honesty, remember?" He laughed quietly. "Then you look like the reason I stopped running." The officiant cleared his throat, though even he was smiling. "Today," he said, "isn't about promises. It's about remembrance, remembering who you've been to get here and who you're willing to become for each other." They exchanged no grand vows, only words that were theirs, quiet, fragile, eternal. Ethan spoke first. "Aisha," he began, his voice low but steady, "you taught me that perfection doesn't live in surfaces or control. It lives in how we forgive ourselves and each other. I used to think love was something to master, but it's not. It's something to surrender to." He paused, emotion catching in his throat. "And with you, I've learned that surrender isn't weakness. It's the only kind of strength that lasts." Aisha's eyes glistened, her fingers tightening around his. Then she spoke. "Ethan," she said softly, "you taught me that love isn't something we possess. It's something we nurture like light through glass. It bends, it changes, but it never disappears." She took a slow breath. "There was a time I thought love was a luxury for people with easy lives. But you showed me that even the broken can build something beautiful. Even the wounded can bloom." Outside, a gentle drizzle began, raindrops slipping down the glass walls like threads of silver. The light caught them, scattering tiny prisms across the orchids. It felt like the sky itself was giving its blessing. The officiant smiled. "Then by the quiet power of truth, not wealth, not law, but love, I pronounce you partners in every storm and every calm that follows." Ethan leaned forward, kissing her not with passion, but with reverence, as if sealing something sacred, something already whole. When they drew apart, Aisha laughed through tears. "We did it." He smiled, resting his forehead against hers. "No," he said softly. "You did. You brought light back to this house." Afterward, they didn't celebrate with champagne or music. Instead, they walked barefoot through the wet garden, hand in hand. The earth smelled of rain and lavender. The orchids swayed gently as if bowing. The twins inside her kicked a faint flutter like wind through leaves. Aisha stopped by the pond, watching ripples expand under the drizzle. "Do you ever think," she asked quietly, "that everything we went through, the rumors, the loss, the fear, was just the storm clearing?" The way Ethan stood beside her, his hand resting on her shoulder. "Maybe storms don't destroy. Maybe they just show us what's strong enough to stay." She turned to him, smiling. "Then maybe we were the glass that didn't shatter." "Or maybe," he said, brushing a drop of rain from her cheek, "we just learned to bend." That evening, the conservatory glowed with candlelight. Their few guests had gone home. The world outside was quiet. Ethan sat on the wooden floor, sketching lazily, as Aisha rested nearby, half asleep, the rhythm of her breathing syncing with the soft patter of rain. He looked up from his notebook. "You know," he murmured, "I used to think happiness had to be earned, that it was the reward for control." And now she asked, eyes still closed, "Now I think it's what happens when you finally stop fighting the wind." She smiled faintly. "Then let's promise to keep standing in it." He leaned back, gazing at the ceiling of glass where raindrops glimmered like tiny stars. Promise. Later that night, Aisha woke to find him still awake, sitting by the window, sketchbook open on his lap. "What are you drawing?" she asked, her voice thick with sleep. He turned the page toward her. It was the conservatory, but different. The walls were gone, replaced by open arches. Trees surrounded it. Sunlight spilled freely through. "It's our house," he said, "the way it should be." She traced the lines gently. "No walls," she whispered. "No walls," he repeated. "Just light." The next morning, the sky cleared completely. The last drops of rain clung to the glass, catching the sunrise and scattering it into color. Aisha stood in the center of the conservatory, feeling the warmth of sunlight against her skin. Behind her, Ethan slipped his arms around her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. "This is where it all began," he said. "And where it begins again," she replied. They stayed like that, quiet, steady, wrapped in morning light, as the orchids swayed gently in the breeze. The world outside could whisper, could watch, could judge. But in that moment, they belonged only to each other, two hearts that had survived the wind and learned to grow roots in glass. The morning they were born, the sky turned lavender. Rain had fallen through the night, soft, rhythmic, patient, and by dawn, the world smelled of beginnings. In the glass conservatory, orchids bowed under droplets of silver, each petal trembling, like it too was waiting for the sound of life. Inside the small hospital room, Aisha gripped Ethan's hand so tightly her knuckles went white. Her body ached, her breath broke, but her eyes burned with determination. "You're doing it," he whispered, voice trembling. "You're right there." When the first cry broke the silence, Ethan felt something inside him unravel, that invisible thread he'd carried his whole life, wound tight around control and fear. The doctor smiled. "One more," she said gently. Minutes later, the second cry followed, softer, almost in harmony with the first, like the echo of one soul divided into two. Aisha laughed through tears, exhausted and luminous. "Two hearts," she whispered. "Two halves of everything we've ever lost." Ethan bent his head, pressing his lips to her forehead. "And everything will ever be." They named them Atlas and Sage. Atlas for strength, the boy who entered the world first, loud and certain. Sage for wisdom. The girl whose first sound was a sigh that somehow sounded like peace. Their eyes were like twilight, not brown, not gray, but both. Their skins shimmered with the warm undertone of honey and ivory, two worlds meeting, neither erased. When the nurses placed them in Aisha's arms, Ethan thought, "This is what light looks like when it decides to stay." News of the birth traveled faster than they expected. The same outlets that once called her a scandal now called her a miracle. Headlines read, "From scandal to symbol. The Riveras welcome their twins. Love beyond color. A new chapter for America's favorite redemption story." Aisha ignored the screens, but Ethan didn't. He watched every broadcast, not for ego, but for clarity. He knew how the world worked. It didn't truly change. It just learned new ways to disguise its curiosity as compassion. But this time, he didn't feel anger, only resolve. 3 months later, he announced the founding of the Rivera Foundation for Design and Equity, a scholarship program supporting women of color, pursuing architecture, urban design, and environmental engineering. When asked by a journalist why, Ethan answered simply, "Because love shouldn't just transform us. It should transform the world we touch." He donated half his shares of Rivera Industries to the foundation. The board protested. Investors panicked. But he didn't waver. For the first time, his power didn't come from control. It came from conviction. At the first board meeting after the announcement, he spoke without notes. "I spent years building towers that reached the clouds," he said. "But the truth is, I never built a home until I met her. Meanwhile, Aisha's life changed in quieter ways. The public wanted to turn her into an icon, the woman who tamed the billionaire, the modern fairy tale. But she refused to be reduced to myth. She returned to design not grand projects, but small, purposeful ones. Community centers, shelters, classrooms filled with light. Her name began to circulate in architectural circles no longer as Ethan Rivera's wife, but as Aisha Washington, architect of renewal. Still, fame never tempted her. She only cared about what her work could give back. So when the foundation invited her to speak at its first public event, she hesitated. "I'm not good at speeches," she told Ethan, adjusting the strap of her simple navy dress. He smiled. "You're not supposed to be good at them. You're supposed to be true." The event was held in the conservatory, the same place that had witnessed their storms, their vows, and their rebirth. Hundreds gathered, from students to donors to journalists. But when Aisha stepped onto the small stage, the crowd fell silent. She stood there for a moment, looking out at the sea of faces. Different shades, different stories. Behind her, the orchids glowed under the afternoon light. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm. "Sure. I used to think love healed wounds," she began. "That if we were lucky, it could erase pain, erase difference. But now I know love doesn't heal wounds. It transforms them." She paused, letting the silence breathe. "It turns our scars into light that helps someone else find their way." Cameras clicked, but for once the flashes didn't feel intrusive. They felt reverent. "I stand here not as a miracle, not as a wife, not as a story someone else wrote," she continued. "I stand here as a woman who dared to rebuild. And if my story teaches anything, let it be this: that broken doesn't mean unworthy. That love, real love, doesn't save you. It invites you to save yourself." Applause rippled like wind through glass. Ethan watched her from the crowd, pride swelling in quiet waves. When she stepped down, he met her halfway, took her hand and whispered, "You just changed the air in this room." She smiled. "Then maybe the world can breathe again." After the ceremony, they brought the twins into the conservatory. The children reached for the orchids, tiny hands brushing against petals. "They'll grow up between worlds," Aisha said softly. "Black and white. Wealth and truth. You and me." Ethan nodded. "Then they'll learn to build bridges instead of walls." Outside, dusk painted the sky in rose and indigo, the same colors reflected in their children's eyes. Aisha turned to him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you think the world's ready for them?" He smiled. "Maybe not, but they'll change it anyway." That night, when the guests had gone and the house was quiet again, Aisha stood in the conservatory, rocking Sage in her arms, while Ethan held Atlas against his shoulder. The twins' breathing was steady, their small fingers curled around strands of their parents' hair. The light from the moon filtered through the glass, bathing the family in silver. For a moment, the entire world seemed to hum in tune with their hearts, 4 rhythms, 1 melody. Aisha looked up, eyes shimmering. "Do you remember what I told you the night we first met?" Ethan smiled. "Something about justice." She nodded. "That I didn't know if I still believed in it. And now," she pressed her lips against Sage's forehead, "now, I think justice isn't something the world gives us. It's what we create every time we choose love over fear." Ethan's voice softened. "Then maybe this," he gestured to the room, to their children, "to her is justice. Or maybe it's just light," she whispered. They stood there, the glass around them glinting with the reflection of moonlight and dreams. The house that had once been cold and perfect was now alive, breathing with laughter, footsteps, lullabies. And outside, the world, flawed, divided, uncertain, was already changing color. A year had passed since the world last whispered their names. The house that once stood as a fortress now breathed like an open heart. The glass conservatory, once a symbol of solitude, had become a living place again. Children's laughter echoed where silence once reigned. The Rivera Community Center, they called it now. But to Aisha, it would always be the greenhouse of light, a space reborn, not for orchids, but for people. Each morning she arrived early, carrying books and rolls of paper. The sunlight spilled through the tall glass walls, scattering warmth across the tables, where children sketched their first houses, bridges, and dreams. They came from everywhere. The neighborhoods no one remembered, the corners of the city no one claimed. And she told them all the same thing. Design isn't about beauty. It's about belonging. From the second-floor balcony, Ethan watched her. She was in her element, barefoot, laughing with a group of children, her curls catching the light. Her voice carried across the room, clear and grounded. He stood holding Atlas and Sage, each perched on one arm, the twins now a year old. Curious, uncontainable, alive. See that, he whispered to them. That's your mother. She builds things the world can't destroy. Atlas babbled something that sounded like a reply. Sage reached toward the glass ceiling, as if trying to touch the light that filtered through. Ethan smiled. He used to measure success in stock prices and architectural awards. Now it was in the way his children's laughter filled the air. At noon, Aisha finished her class and joined them. Her hands were smudged with graphite, her cheeks flushed with energy. "How long were you watching?" she asked, teasing. "Long enough to realize, I'll never be the most inspiring teacher in this house," he said. She rolled her eyes, but her smile was soft. "You're not doing badly. You're learning patience." "I had good teachers," he said. "You mostly." She leaned in, pressing her forehead to his. "Then maybe we've both graduated." The twins gurgled between them, a reminder that peace never lasts more than a few seconds with children. Sage reached for Aisha's necklace, while Atlas tried to chew on his father's collar. Aisha laughed, catching both their tiny hands. "You see, they already want to build too. Let's hope they build something gentler than we did," Ethan murmured. That evening, after the last class ended and the children had gone home, Aisha sat alone in the conservatory. The sunset poured through the glass like liquid fire, painting everything in shades of amber and rose. She could see her reflection, older now, steadier, softer. The twins slept in a playpen nearby. Their small chests rose and fell in rhythm, two perfect reminders of everything she once thought impossible. Ethan joined her, carrying 2 mugs of tea. He handed her one and sat beside her on the bench. "They're out like stars after rain," he said, nodding toward the twins. "Stars don't sleep," she said softly. "They just rest between shines." He smiled. "You still talk like an architect and a poet all at once." She shrugged. "Maybe building and believing aren't that different. Both start with faith in something unseen." Outside, the garden swayed in the twilight. The orchids bloomed again, their petals faintly luminescent in the fading light. Ethan followed her gaze. "Do you ever miss it? The quiet, the distance?" She shook her head. "No, I miss who I was before I learned better." "Better?" She turned to him, eyes calm. "I thought light meant perfection. Now I know it means forgiveness." He reached for her hand. "You once said light only comes when we're willing to break." "I did," she said, smiling. "And I still believe it. But now I think the breaking isn't the end. It's the invitation." "To what?" "To see what was always inside us." Ethan nodded, letting the words sink in. He had spent years trying to build a life so flawless that nothing could penetrate it. But love, her love, had cracked it open, letting the light in. Later they walked through the center together, passing murals. The children had painted houses made of colors, bridges, stretching into clouds, stick figures holding hands under golden suns. At the far wall hung a framed photo, their wedding day. Simple clothes, no jewels, just rain and light and laughter. Beneath it, a brass plaque read, "This place exists because two people decided to begin again." Aisha paused to trace the engraving with her fingertips. "Do you think it's enough?" she asked quietly. "What? This? Us? The foundation? The work? Have we really changed anything?" Ethan studied her, then the children's drawings around them. "Maybe changing the world isn't the point," he said. "Maybe it's enough to remind people it's still worth saving." She smiled faintly, repeating the words as if to memorize them. Worth saving. That night, after putting the twins to sleep, they returned once more to the glass house. It was quiet now, the kind of quiet that doesn't ache anymore. Just stillness, content, and alive. The moon rose above the glass ceiling, turning the floor into silver water. Ethan sat beside her, watching the reflection shimmer around them. "You know," he said, "I used to think I was the light in this house. That my money, my vision, my control, they were what made it shine. And now," she asked softly. "Now I know I was the glass," he said. "Strong, clear, but empty. The light was always you." Aisha's throat tightened. She reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "The light was us," she whispered. "It took both the glass and the glow to make anything beautiful." He smiled, a quiet surrender in his eyes. "Then promise me something. Anything. When I'm gone, you'll keep this place alive." She pressed her lips to his knuckles. "You're not going anywhere. We still have a world to teach." He laughed softly. "And they say I'm the dreamer." At dawn, the sound of children returning filled the air again. The twins awoke babbling as sunlight spilled through their room. Outside, the first class of the day was already gathering, little hands clutching notebooks, eyes wide with curiosity. Aisha opened the doors, welcoming them in. "Today," she said, smiling, "we build something new." The children scattered across the tables, drawing towers that leaned toward the sun, bridges that crossed impossible rivers. Ethan stood in the doorway, holding Sage, while Atlas clung to his shoulder. He watched her guide the students, her gestures, her patience, the way every word she spoke carried hope like it was oxygen. "Do you see her?" he whispered to their children. "That's what light looks like when it chooses to return." The twins giggled as if they understood. Outside, sunlight pierced through the glass ceiling, beams of gold, soft and endless. It fell across Aisha's hair, Ethan's arms, and the twins' small faces, weaving them together in a tapestry of warmth. For a moment, it was as if the world itself bowed in quiet blessing. Aisha looked up, her gaze catching his across the light. "We made it," she mouthed. He nodded. Together. And as laughter filled the air, children's voices, the hum of life, the whisper of wind against glass, it became clear that their love had done something the storms never could. It hadn't changed the world. It had simply made it worth believing in again. Epilogue. The last line of light. Years later. When the twins were grown, people would still come to the Rivera Community Center. They would stand beneath the glass ceiling and say, "This is where the light began." But Ethan and Aisha would know the truth. The light hadn't begun there. It had simply found its way home. True love doesn't change the world. It reminds us it's still worth saving.